Hi, it's Lee from coloringqueen.net, and I hope you are all doing really well today. We've been out and about. We've been spent the weekend looking for some houses. I think we're going to have to try and move to a single-story house. It's getting really difficult with Buddy. He's fallen down the stairs a few times, so things are getting a bit tricky around here. So we haven't found anything in our budget, so we're going to go out and have another look this weekend and see what's out there. And I guess this is going to take a while, so we've got to find somewhere that's good for Buddy and good for us and, easy for David to get to work and whatnot. But anyway, if you hear a little Tinkerbell, I've got Billy here and she's got her little Tinkerbell collar on. And Millie also has a Tinkerbell collar on, so it's like jingle all the way over here with all the little bells. But so hopefully it won't come out too much in the audio. And also it's very humid today, so I have got the fan on a low setting, so I hope that doesn't interfere with the audio. But anyway, let's get on with today's story. And I don't know about you guys, but do you remember back when you learned how to drive? I was on my learner's permit for ages. I actually didn't get my license to drive until I actually really needed it, because my boyfriend used to drive me where I needed to go, or my stepfather, or I'd just walk. And so, of course, as soon as the boyfriend and I parted ways, I went out the next day and I got my Ps, which is the next step in Australia. You get your learners and your Ps and then your full license. And I bought my car at the same time. So I just went out, we broke up, I went out, got my license, and then the next day I bought a car. And I think I was about 18 or 19. I should have got it earlier. But being from the country, I knew how to drive anyway. And I'd first learnt to drive the tractor on the farm. And I remember, though, when I was a learner driver, and my stepfather taught me to drive in the giant station wagon that he had. And the gears were like 3 on the tree, and you don't see those type of gears nowadays. They're the gears that are on the steering wheel. And it was a painful experience. I ended up then getting driving lessons so I could do reverse parking and that sort of stuff that you needed to know in the years that I didn't know on how to drive, because I could only really do straight lines and whatnot. So I learned in a 4 on the floor manual, which was so much better than the 3 in the tray. And then the day of my driver's license, the instructor had an automatic car, and I had no idea how to even start it. Was wondering what the P and the R and the D were all about. Anyway, I ended up doing my test in the car and I got the thing going. But my first car after that was actually a manual, and I've always had a manual car. I can barely drive an automatic still all those years later, and I've only ever driven an automatic car a handful of times. And the last time was a few weeks ago with David's car, and he'd taken my car for the day and I needed to go to the shop, so I got in his car. And I remember sitting there thinking, why won't this thing move? What's wrong with this car? And I was about to ring him up and say, how do you make the car go? When I realised I was so used to having my foot on the clutch that I actually had my foot on the brake, and no wonder we weren't moving. So why am I telling you all these driving stories? Well, it's because of the story that I'm going to tell you today. So let's lean into this one. So this story takes place in South Australia. And I'd be interested to know also, before we get into the story, if you do drive, if you drive an automatic or a manual. I really need to get on top of this automatic thing, because I think David wants to get another automatic, and I'm going to have to learn how to drive the thing. So anyway, our story today takes place in South Australia, and it revolves around the Cook family. They had a birthday party, And Irene Cook, she decided that they would get some fish and chips for this event. And her sister-in-law Margaret, she said she'd come to her to the fish and chip shop. Now Margaret had never obtained her driver's licence, and she told Irene that she was actually going to get her licence the next day, and she'd been the butt of all the family jokes for not already having a licence. So Irene said to Margaret, well, jump in and drive. And of course it was a disaster. She was inexperienced, and on jumping in the car, she ended up pressing the accelerator too much, or stepping on the gas, as my friends across the pond would say. And she was even doing this around a corner when you should, of course, be reducing your speed. Now, of course, disaster happened, and she ended up crashing into a telegraph pole. And in Australia, these poles are incredibly sturdy. They hold up the electrical wiring, and you would really know it when you hit one. So Irene, of course, was injured, and she sued Margaret. Now, the court had to consider if Margaret was negligent. But as Margaret had never held a driver's licence, or even a learner's permit, she didn't have a licence, so the court had to consider whether this was a factor. So normally a driver owes the standard of care of other drivers of ordinary skill and experience. But is this standard, or baseline if you like, reasonable or appropriate when the person driving has never driven before to demonstrate that sort of standard of skill? And the court said in relation to any other driver on the road, Margaret owed the same standard of care as a driver of ordinary skill and experience. But Irene knew that Margaret didn't have any skill or experience. So knowing that, the court said that Margaret only owed Irene the standard of care that would be required of a first-time driver. But if Margaret had been involved in an accident with other drivers, the court said that the reasonable standard of care of instructor and pupil would ordinarily be the same objective standard, since the relevant relationships will be the ordinary one with any other user of the road, because that seems fair, because any other user of the road doesn't know that this driver of the car coming that they might be involved in a collision with is inexperienced. They expect them to be capable and competent of driving on the road. So in that case, there was no expectation, because of the special circumstances, of reasonable care and skill and experience of someone that is competent and experienced in driving. And in the end, even a terrible and inexperienced driver shows the same standard of care that would be shown to an ordinary skilled or experienced driver. The court ended up saying that the standard owed by a pupil, someone learning, to the driving instructor was that reasonably expected of an unqualified and inexperienced driver, or an inexperienced driver of ordinary prudence. So what they're basically saying, without all the gobbledygook, is that it's a lesser standard, it's something lower than other drivers due to their inexperience and lack of qualifications. Now, this was the law in Australia right up until 2008, when all that changed. And the High Court did something that they don't usually do. They actually overturned that decision. And if you follow the High Court, they're not known for doing that at all. So the reason why is that another case came up that was very similar to this one. So for this one, we're now going to the Northern Territory. And there were two families. They went on holidays together. Both of those families had teenage sons. And while they were away on holiday, they visited many places around Australia, including Ayers Rock, now known as Uluru. the Kings Canyon, Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, and along the way on many of these wide and sort of semi-travelled roads, the parents both allowed each of their teenage sons to drive for 30 to 40 minutes at a time when the road was wider, but really it was still a dirt track, albeit a wide one. Now, when they were in the Northern Territory, the 16-year-old boy, we'll call him McNeely, he was driving the four-wheel drive station wagon. Now, he'd just obtained his New South Wales learner's permit, and just like in the case of Cook, he was inexperienced. Paul Embry, his friend's father, who didn't own the car, sat beside the young boy McNeely while he drove. Now, in the country, and I presume in the Northern Territory, it's something that often happens, that you drive without a licence. And yes, I did it too as well when I was a kid living on a farm. Now, the young boy driving, he noticed some tyre debris that was on the road, and he tried to steer the car to the right to avoid it, rather than sort of lining it up in your sight and driving over it. So Paul Embry yelled at him to brake, but the young boy went to the far right, then left, accelerated, and the vehicle rolled. Now, Paul Embry, he was the passenger. He suffered spinal injuries in the accident, and he was left a tetraplegic. He, of course, sued, and the trial court, relying on the previous case of Cook, awarded in excess of $9.5 million to him. Now, they did reduce that figure by 30% for Paul Embry's contributory negligence, on the basis that due to the young boy's inexperience as a driver, a supervisor, which he was, couldn't expect a high level of competence and a lower standard needed to apply. And that's the law that was in that previous case that I told you about. And so in this case, they said he was 30% negligent in failing to instruct the young boy to straddle the tyre debris or offer some basic advice to a learner driver not to make any sudden change in direction or speed, especially on a dirt road. It wasn't tar sealed. And as many people know, on a dirt road you can catch gravel and you can spin out of control. So it then went to the Court of Appeal, and they confirmed the negligence but increased the amount of contributory negligence from 30% to 66%. That's huge. So Paul Embry was really stuck in the position that he really had to appeal this, because then he would only have 34% of those damages. And I know that $9.5 million less 66% might sound good, but when you have long-standing injuries like his, that money goes pretty fast, because you have to pay for your own medical out of those damages. And of course it needs to cover for any loss of income, and of course keep you going for the rest of your life, unless for some reason you are able to earn an income and then it's sort of in between what you've lost and what you're able to learn type thing. So anyway, Paul Embry appealed to the High Court, and he said that the previous case of Cook that I told you about, first of all, was wrong and it should be overruled. And he also said that the same standard of case as any other driver, whether licensed or not, should apply. And he also argued that contributory negligence didn't actually cause the damage suffered, or alternatively, if the High Court didn't like that argument, his argument was that the Court of Appeal shouldn't have interfered with the assessment of negligence at 30% and increased it to 66. So from Paul Embry's point of view, it was worth the fight going to the High Court, as the damages had been reduced so significantly. Now, when the High Court had a sticky beak at this case, the majority of the High Court agreed that Cook's case should actually be overturned, and that the standard care owed by an inexperienced driver to his supervisor was the actual normal standard of a reasonable driver. And so 6-1 for memory of the judges agreed on that. And they also found that the 30% contributory negligence should apply, and that 66% shouldn't stay. So the High Court is the highest court in Australia. So there's nowhere else to appeal to. So this is now the current law. And it's extremely rare for the High Court of Australia to overturn its own decisions. It's really unheard of. They do it. I really can't think of another case where they've done it, to be honest. They're more likely to actually distinguish their decisions and say, well, that doesn't apply because this is a little bit different because of, and they give reasons for it. But for them to overturn the decision is really rare and extremely unusual. So where does this leave us now? So basically nowadays, the standard of care that unlicensed or inexperienced drivers owe to other people, including people that might be supervising them driving, is the same standard that's owed by a licensed driver. And when supervisors or instructions bring a claim against an inexperienced driver as a result of an accident caused by that inexperience of the pupil, the focus is no longer on whether the driver breached their duty of care, but rather whether the instructor or supervisor contributed to their injuries by failing to properly instruct and or supervise. So if you're teaching the kids to drive, be very careful. Now remember, proper driving schools, they would have insurance, etc. for these sorts of things. But when you're teaching your friends or mum and dads, especially, these rules will apply to you if you're in Australia. So, make sure you know your road rules yourself and that you're in a position to actually provide proper instructions and supervision, or otherwise any accident that is a result of that inexperienced driver, you could find yourself contributory negligent. And if you got injured, that damages that you could have been awarded will be reduced by the amount of contributory negligence. So remember, in Embry's case, Paul Embry, that was reduced first of all by 30%, then to 66%, and then after a big fight all the way to the High Court, it was reinstated at 30%. But that's a big fight, and not everyone wants to take things to the High Court. That's a big process. So anyway, I don't know about you, but it's a worry. But as I've said before, I think Lord Atkin, when he decided the snail in the bottle case, I think he'd be rolling in his grave right now if he's seen how the law of negligence has expanded so much. But I don't know about you guys. I'd love to hear what you think, if you think that's reasonable. Personally, I don't know. I'll have to, read it in more detail again one day. But I always liked the inexperienced and the learners to have a lower standard as fitting to their learner status. But when 6 out of 7 High Court judges says it's wrong, you have to sit up and pay attention, I guess. Although only one of my favourite judges disagreed with it. So I'm thinking, maybe there is a little bit that agrees with me on it. But I don't know. It's a very difficult one, I think. And I think it's weird how it's all flipped back over to the supervisor or the instructor, because yes, they are the one with more knowledge and more experience, but in the spur of the moment and when things happen in accidents and whatnot, it's often very difficult to formulate those instructions in a short period of time. And so, what might be considered failing to instruct might be just a split second that it's taking them to process what they should be advising, and things can happen in a split second. So I don't know how I feel about this. But anyway, it's been around for a while now, this law, and I think we've all adjusted to it, but I still have some nostalgia to the old days when there was that lower standard of care. But as always, I would be interested to know what you think. And I think I forgot at the beginning to tell you which book I was colouring from. I still have another picture to finish up on the channel from this book. It was the Christmas one, the snowball and the bear. So I do have to finish that picture. But this is from Animal Fantasy Season. It's a Japanese colouring book. And I thought I'd colour these little Halloween pumpkins for Halloween, obviously. And I'm using the Prismacolor Art Sticks crayons to do the background, because there's a lot of background here, and if I use those in bulk to do the background, and then I can just go over it in the corresponding pencil, because they align with 48 of the Prismacolor Premier pencils, then I can use that for the finer bits and, get this picture coloured, because every time I do a background and it's a lot of pencil work, my wrists just ache. So I thought I'd take the bulk approach today and just do it all in bulk and get it done really quickly. Now, the black frame around this picture, I actually did that in black biro. I was going to do it in my black Posca pen, but I couldn't find it, so I just did it in usual biro that you get from Coles or the supermarket. Nothing fancy at all, but that's me, not fancy. So I coloured that in, and then I'm going to probably do one more video just to finish this one up. And that'll be it for my Halloween picture, I think. I don't think I'll have the strength to do another one, but I have enjoyed colouring in this book. So I think that's all I've got to tell you. I'm just looking at Billy. She's sound asleep in Buddy's basket. Oh, she's so cute. Yesterday she went up to Buddy and gave him a big kiss on the face, and she's so tiny compared to him. It was just adorable. I've been walking both of them now, but what I do is, because they all got tangled up the other day when I walked them together, because they're different heights and whatnot, now I take Buddy for a walk, then I come back and I get Billy and take her and just rotate them, and it's actually been really good trying to get my diabetes under control, as I'm doing 3 walks a day with these guys, and it has been very good. So I think nothing like walking the dog to improve your health. But she's so cute. And Millie, of course, I think I said to you guys, I think she's sulking at the moment. She's asleep on the dining room table. She often gets a little bit jelly when Billy's over, because Billy takes her basket. But Billy hasn't today. She's taken Buddy's basket. So I don't know. These pets, they'll work it out amongst themselves, I guess. Anyway, we're going to spend some time in the next couple of days looking for a house. So wish us luck. I hope we can find something that's suitable for us and in our budget, and not too far to move to and all the rest of it. But wish us luck, and I'd love to know what you think about today's story. And until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.